Dr. Vextorin stood before the observation window of the research station, his four eyes blinking in sequence as he watched the small blue planet rotate slowly below. Earth, the homeworld of the most confusing species the Galactic Council had ever encountered. He had spent the last 3 standard cycles reviewing the preliminary data, and nothing about it made sense. Behind him, his assistant Kirasal made a soft clicking sound with her mandibles. "The human specimens are ready for examination, Doctor." Vextorin turned away from the window. He had studied many species during his 300 years of scientific work. The Veltorians, with their crystal skin that could withstand temperature extremes that would destroy most organic matter. The Morathi, who breathed methane and existed in pressure environments that would crush lesser beings. The Silken, who existed partly in dimensions other beings could not see or comprehend. But humans were different. Humans made no sense at all. "Show me the data again," he said, walking toward his laboratory. His footsteps echoed on the metal floor, a rhythmic pattern that helped him think. The laboratory was a large circular room filled with screens and machines of every kind. In the center was a raised platform where biological samples could be analyzed down to the molecular level. Kirasal pressed a few buttons on the main console, and holographic displays appeared in the air around them, filling the room with soft blue light. "This is what we have collected from the human colony on Proxima Station," she said. "Medical records, genetic samples, physical performance data, and psychological evaluations. The Council wants a complete analysis of human biological capabilities." Vextorin studied the information floating before him. His species, the Carthan, were considered the greatest scientists in the known galaxy. They had mapped the evolution of over 10,000 intelligent species across hundreds of worlds. They had created the universal theory of biological development, which explained how all life adapted to its environment. Every species they had ever studied followed the same rules, the same patterns. Until humans. "Tell me again about the gravity incident," Vextorin said, his voice quiet with concentration. Kirasal pulled up the relevant file, and new displays appeared showing the details. 3 years ago, the artificial gravity system on Proxima Station failed. The station went from 1 standard gravity to 2.5 standard gravities for a period of 6 months while repairs were made. The damage to the gravity generators was extensive. And the other species on the station. The Veltorians suffered immediate bone fractures. Even their crystal structures could not adapt to the sudden change. The Morathi could not move at all and had to be kept alive by machines. The Silken evacuated within the first day, saying the dimensional stress was unbearable. But the humans stayed. Yes, they stayed. The station records show they complained about the difficulty, about muscle pain and fatigue, but they continued working. And more than that, Doctor, look at these medical records from after the incident. Vextorin leaned closer to the display, his eyes focusing on the biological data. What he saw made his eyes blink rapidly, a sign of extreme surprise in his species. "This cannot be correct. There must be an error in the measurements. We have verified the data 17 times using 3 different analysis methods. It is correct." The records showed that, after 6 months of living in high gravity, the human colonists had developed stronger bones and larger muscles. Their hearts had grown more powerful. Their circulatory systems had increased in efficiency. Their bodies had literally rebuilt themselves to handle the new environment. "That is not possible," Vextorin said, packing around the display. "Evolution takes thousands of generations. Individual organisms cannot simply decide to become different. The basic laws of biology prevent it." And yet they did. The evidence is undeniable. Vextorin walked around the display, studying it from every angle. His mind raced through everything he knew about biology, chemistry, and physics. Nothing could explain what he was seeing. It violated the principles that had guided scientific understanding for millennia. I need to study them directly, he said finally. Bring me the human volunteers. I must see this phenomenon with my own instruments. The humans arrived an hour later. There were 5 of them, all from different parts of their homeworld, representing the diversity of their species. Their names were Marcus, Chen, Adiz, Vladimir, and Sarah. They seemed relaxed and friendly, smiling at the scientists as they entered the laboratory, looking around with obvious interest at the equipment. Vextorin found this strange. Most species became nervous when studied by Carthan scientists. The Carthan were tall, with gray skin and multiple eyes, and many species found them frightening. Some had to be sedated before examinations could proceed. But the humans simply walked in and looked around with curiosity, pointing at various machines and asking questions to each other. "Welcome," Vextorin said through his translator device. "Thank you for volunteering for this research. The Galactic Council appreciates your cooperation." The one called Marcus shrugged. A gesture Vextorin had learned indicated casual acceptance. "Happy to help. Always wanted to visit a Carthan research station. Your technology is impressive." "You are not afraid." Marcus looked at his companions, then back at Vextorin. "Should we be? Is there something we need to worry about?" "Many species find us intimidating. Our appearance disturbs them." The woman called Adiz laughed. It was a strange sound to Carthan ears, musical and warm, filled with genuine amusement. "Where I come from, we have animals called hippos. They look peaceful, like gentle giants, but they kill more people than almost any other animal in Africa. You look friendly compared to a hippo." Vextorin did not understand this comparison, but he noted that the humans showed no fear response. Their heart rates remained steady. Their hormone levels were calm. Their body language was open and relaxed. This alone was remarkable. He had studied species who went into panic at the sight of unfamiliar aliens, but humans seemed to treat everything as an opportunity for new experiences. "Please stand on the examination platform," Vextorin said, gesturing toward the center of the room. The humans did as he asked, stepping onto the raised surface without hesitation. Kirasol activated the scanning equipment, and beams of light passed over their bodies, collecting data on every aspect of their biology from their skin cells to their deepest organs. "Fascinating," Vextorin murmured as the results appeared on his displays. "Your genetic structure is highly unstable. The variation is extraordinary." "Is that bad?" asked the one called Sarah, a note of concern in her voice. "For most species, yes. Stable genetics means consistent development, predictable outcomes. Unstable genetics usually leads to disease and death. Mutations become errors rather than improvements." He paused, studying the data more closely. "But in your case, the instability seems to serve a purpose. Your genes can activate and deactivate in response to environmental conditions. They switch on and off like machines responding to input." Chen, who was a scientist herself according to her file, stepped closer to look at the display. "You mean epigenetics? We've known about that for a while on Earth." "You have a name for it." "Of course. Genes can be turned on or off by external factors. Diet, stress, environment, behavior, even emotional states. It's basic biology. We teach it in first-year university courses." Vextorin felt a strange sensation he rarely experienced, profound confusion. "This is considered basic among your people, not advanced research." "Pretty basic, yeah. We've been studying it for over a century." He turned to Kirasol. "Why did we not know this about humans? Why is this not in our records?" His assistant made an embarrassed clicking sound. "We assumed they were a simple species, Doctor. We did not examine them closely until the Council requested this research. Their technology was so primitive compared to ours that we thought their biology would be equally simple." This was true. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 10 years ago. They were considered primitive by most standards. Their space travel technology was basic, barely capable of reaching nearby stars. Their weapons were crude chemical and kinetic systems. Their understanding of physics was centuries behind the major species. But now Vextorin wondered if they had missed something important. The Council judged species by their technology, their scientific achievements, their mental powers. Humans scored low on all these measures, but what if they had been measuring the wrong things? What if the true measure of a species was something else entirely? "I want to run more tests," he said. "Full biological analysis, stress responses, environmental adaptation, everything. I want to understand exactly what these humans are capable of." The humans agreed readily. Over the next several days, Vextorin put them through dozens of experiments. He tested how their bodies responded to heat and cold, to pressure changes, to atmospheric variations. He measured their ability to function without sleep, pushing them to the edge of exhaustion and watching how their bodies compensated. He examined their digestive systems, their immune responses, their healing capabilities. Each test brought new surprises that challenged everything he thought he knew. When exposed to extreme cold, the humans' blood vessels contracted to protect their vital organs, a response that happened within seconds. Their bodies began producing additional heat through muscle activity they barely noticed. When given food from 12 different planets, their digestive systems broke down and absorbed nutrients from all of them, even foods they had never encountered before. Their gut bacteria adapted within days to process alien compounds. When injured, their bodies immediately began repairing the damage, creating new tissue at speeds Vextorin had never recorded in any other species. Cuts healed in days. Broken bones mended in weeks. Even nerve damage, which was permanent in most species, showed signs of regeneration over time. But it was the final test that truly shocked him. "I want to test your cognitive adaptation," he explained to the human volunteers. "I will show you a puzzle that requires a type of thinking your species has never developed. It typically takes other species many generations of evolution to develop the neural pathways needed to solve it." He presented them with the Carthan logic array, a complex three-dimensional puzzle that required simultaneous spatial, mathematical, and temporal reasoning. The solver had to track multiple changing variables while predicting future states and remembering past configurations. No species had ever solved it without genetic modification or technological assistance. The Carthan themselves had needed 1,000 years of selective breeding to develop minds capable of completing it. Marcus studied the puzzle for a moment, walking around it, tilting his head at different angles. Then he turned to his companions. "Hey, this looks kind of like that game Chen's kid plays. What's it called?" Chen leaned closer, examining the shifting patterns. "Oh yeah, it's like a mix of 3D chess and Sudoku, with some elements of that prediction game we play at the lab." "Vladimir, you're good at chess. You think in strategic patterns. Sarah, you're better at math and spotting numerical relationships. Adiz, you think in pictures and spatial forms. Let's work together on this." Vextorin watched in stunned silence as the 5 humans gathered around the puzzle. They talked quickly, pointing at different parts, arguing and agreeing, building on each other's ideas. They divided the problem into sections, each person handling the aspects they were best at while communicating constantly about their progress. Within 3 hours, they had solved the Carthan logic array. 3 hours, a puzzle that had taken his species 1,000 years of directed evolution to master. Kiera Sal's mandibles hung open, her species' expression of complete disbelief. "Doctor, what does this mean? How is this possible?" Vextorin sat down heavily on a nearby bench. His legs felt weak, which was unusual for a Carthan. "It means everything we thought we knew about evolution is wrong. Our entire understanding of biological development must be reconsidered." The report Vextorin sent to the Galactic Council caused an immediate uproar. Scientists from 100 worlds demanded to see his data. Philosophers argued about its meaning for understanding life itself. Political leaders worried about its implications for the balance of power in the galaxy. Within weeks, Vextoran's small research station had become the most important location in the galaxy. Ships arrived carrying scientists of every species. They crowded into his laboratory, studying his findings, running their own tests on the human volunteers, debating the results with each other in a dozen different languages. The humans themselves seemed amused by all the attention. "I feel like a zoo animal," Marcus joked one day, surrounded by a group of Veltorian researchers who were measuring his stress responses for the 5th time that week. "What is a zoo animal?" asked Vextoran, who had begun spending most of his time with the human volunteers. "It's when you put animals in cages so people can look at them. Usually animals from far-away places that people want to see up close." "That sounds unpleasant for the animals." Marcus shrugged. "It can be, but these animals are usually from far-away places and people want to understand them better. Conservation, education, that kind of thing. I guess that's what's happening here. Lots of aliens wanting to understand us." Vextoran considered this. "You do not mind being studied so extensively. Most species would find it invasive." "Not really. I'm curious about you too. We're all learning together. Besides, it's kind of flattering that everyone finds us so interesting." This attitude confused many of the visiting scientists. The Veltorians thought the humans were being foolish by revealing so much about themselves. The Morathi believed it was some kind of elaborate trick to lull others into false security. The Silken simply could not understand why any species would allow itself to be examined so thoroughly, exposing all its weaknesses and strengths. But Vextoran was beginning to understand. Humans were curious by nature. They wanted to learn, to explore, to understand everything around them. Even when they were the subject of study, they found ways to turn the experience into an opportunity for their own learning. They asked as many questions as they answered. The senior scientist from the Galactic Council arrived 3 months after Vextoran's report. His name was High Examiner Threll, and he was the oldest and most respected scientist in known space. He had lived for 2,000 years and had helped create the universal theory of biological development that had guided scientific understanding for millennia. "Show me everything," Threll demanded. His voice was thin with age but still carried absolute authority. Vextoran showed him the genetic analysis, the adaptation tests, the puzzle results, all of it explained in detail with full documentation. Threll studied the data in silence for a long time. His ancient body, frail and thin after 2 millennia of life, seemed to shrink even further as he absorbed the information. His eyes, dim with age, moved slowly across the displays. "This changes everything," he finally said. "Yes, High Examiner, I believe it does. Our theory assumed that evolution was a slow process, that adaptation happened over many generations through random mutation and natural selection, that individual organisms were fixed in their biological form from birth to death." "Yes, High Examiner, those were the fundamental assumptions." Threll turned to look at the human volunteers, who were in a nearby room playing some kind of card game. They laughed and argued, completely unconcerned about the scientific revolution happening around them. These creatures adapt within a single lifetime. They solve problems by combining their different strengths in ways we never imagined. They show no fear of the unknown, instead treating it as an invitation. Threll shook his head slowly, a gesture he had learned from his own studies of many species. "We measured the wrong things, Vextoran. We thought technology was the measure of a species. We thought mental powers or physical strength or long life spans were what mattered. We were completely wrong." "What does matter, High Examiner?" Threll was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he said, "Flexibility, the ability to change, to grow, to become whatever is needed in any situation." He pointed at the humans. "They are not the strongest species. They are not the smartest by our measures. They do not live the longest or travel the farthest, but they can become all of these things given enough time and pressure. Vextorin nodded. He had reached the same conclusion himself. They are generalists in a galaxy of specialists. We all evolved to be perfect for one environment. They evolved to be adequate for any environment. More than that, Threll said, they are adapters, living evolution. The universe throws challenges at them and they simply change. They bend rather than break. They flow around obstacles rather than being stopped by them. Then what do we do with this knowledge? How should the Council respond? Threll looked at him with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that had watched species evolve and go extinct, that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. We rewrite everything we thought we knew, and we watch the humans very carefully, because I suspect they are going to change the galaxy whether we want them to or not. Chen had been listening to the scientist's conversation from the next room. She did not mean to eavesdrop, but the walls were thin and her hearing was good. The translator device the aliens had given her worked both ways, picking up their conversation as clearly as if they were speaking directly to her. "They're talking about us like we're some kind of miracle," she said to the others, keeping her voice low. Vladimir dealt another hand of cards, his movements practiced and smooth. "Are we not? From their perspective, anyway. We're just people. We're just doing what we've always done." Adiz smiled, her dark eyes warm with understanding. "Maybe that's the miracle, that being people is enough." Chen thought about this. She was a biologist herself, though her specialty was marine life on Earth. She understood what the alien scientists were saying about human adaptation. She had studied it herself in graduate school, but she had never thought of it as remarkable. It was just how life worked on Earth. Humans lived in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They ate almost anything they could find. They survived diseases and injuries that killed other species. They learned new skills quickly and forgot the old ones when they were no longer needed. This was just how humans were. It was normal. But now she realized that other species were not like this. The Veltorians could only live in certain temperature ranges. The Morathi needed specific atmospheric conditions. Most species were adapted to their home worlds so perfectly that they struggled to survive anywhere else, dependent on technology to protect them from any deviation. Humans were adapted to nowhere perfectly, and that meant they could adapt to anywhere. "Do you think this will change how they treat us?" Sarah asked, laying down her cards. "What do you mean?" "Well, they've always looked down on us. We're the new species, the primitive ones with the bad technology, but if they realize we're actually special in some way." Marcus put down his cards and leaned back in his chair. "That's a good question. It could go either way. They might respect us more, start treating us as equals, or they might see us as a threat." "A threat?" Vladimir laughed, his accent thickening as it always did when he found something amusing. "We cannot even build proper starships yet. Our fastest ships take decades to reach nearby stars." "Yet," Marcus said, emphasizing the word. "That's the key word. Think about what that scientist said. We change, we grow, we adapt. If they believe that about us, they might worry about what we'll become in a few hundred years, or a few thousand." The room fell silent. None of them had thought about it that way before. They had been focused on the present, on being studied, on the immediate curiosity of the alien scientists. They hadn't considered the longer implications. Chen looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, the planet that had made them what they were. A world of constant change, of ice ages and warm periods, of continents shifting and oceans rising, of mass extinctions and explosive radiations of new life. A world that had never let its children rest or settle into comfort. Maybe that was the real reason humans were different. They had been forged by a world that kept testing them, kept pushing them, kept demanding more. And they had responded not by specializing, not by perfecting themselves for one environment, but by becoming infinitely flexible. She wondered what that would mean for the future, not just for humans, but for the entire galaxy. Because if the aliens were right about human adaptation, then the galaxy was about to face something it had never encountered before. A species that could not be predicted. A species that grew stronger when challenged. A species that turned every obstacle into an opportunity for growth. Chen smiled to herself, looking at the distant stars. It was going to be an interesting future. High Examiner Threll returned to the Galactic Council with his report. The council chambers were full when he arrived, with representatives from every major species crowding the gallery to hear what he had learned. The chamber was a vast dome, decorated with symbols from 1,000 worlds, lit by lights that mimicked a dozen different suns. The universal theory of biological development is incomplete, Threll announced, his voice amplified to fill the enormous space. It must be revised to account for the human phenomenon. Murmurs spread through the chamber like waves across water. The universal theory had stood for 10,000 years. It was the foundation of all biological science in the galaxy. Revising it was not a small matter. It meant questioning everything they thought they knew. "Explain," demanded the council speaker, a massive Veltorian whose crystal skin gleamed in the chamber lights. His voice boomed with authority. Threll activated his display, showing the data from Vextoran's research on screens throughout the chamber. Humans possess an adaptation capability unlike anything we have previously recorded. They can modify their own biology in response to environmental challenges within a single generation or even a single lifetime. They can combine individual strengths to solve problems no individual could solve alone. And they show an unusual psychological trait. Instead of fearing the unknown, they seek it out. The chamber erupted in noise. Species shouted questions and objections in their native languages. Some demanded more proof. Others insisted it was impossible, that the data must be flawed. A few called for the human specimens to be brought before the council for direct examination. But one voice cut through the chaos. It belonged to the Silken Ambassador, a being of shifting light and shadow who rarely spoke at council meetings. The Silken existed partly in other dimensions, and their perspective was unlike that of any other species. "We have observed these humans," the Silken said, their voice seeming to come from everywhere at once, filling the chamber with strange harmonics. "We have watched them since they first reached for the stars. We can confirm what the High Examiner says. They are not like other species. They are something new in the galaxy, something we have not seen before." The chamber fell silent. The Silken were the most ancient species in the galaxy. They had existed before most stars were born, had watched civilizations rise and fall over millions of years. If they confirmed the findings, then they must be true. The Silken did not make mistakes about such things. "What does this mean for the council?" the speaker asked, his crystal form flickering with agitation. Threll hesitated. This was the question he had been dreading. "It means we must be very careful. Humans are young, and they are few in number. But if their adaptation ability continues to develop, if they continue to grow and change at the rate we have observed, they could become a very significant force in the galaxy within a few centuries." "A threat," another voice called out from the gallery. "Not necessarily. Their psychological profile suggests they prefer cooperation to conflict. They form alliances readily. They show empathy for other species, but they are not passive. When threatened, they fight back. And when they fight, they adapt to the fight. They become whatever they need to be to win." The council debated for many hours as the artificial suns of the chamber rose and set in simulation of a planetary day. Some wanted to limit human expansion, to contain them in their current systems. Others wanted to study them more closely, to understand their abilities before making decisions. A few suggested eliminating them entirely before they could become a danger. But in the end, the council decided to do nothing. Humans had not broken any laws. They had not threatened anyone. They were simply existing, growing, adapting as all species did. Taking action against them would set a dangerous precedent. The council would watch and wait. They would study the humans and try to understand them better. And they would hope that when the humans finally reached their full potential, they would choose to be friends rather than enemies. Back on the research station, Vextorin shared the council's decision with the human volunteers. "They are going to observe you," he said, "to study your development as a species over the coming years." Marcus nodded slowly, processing the information. "That makes sense. We'd probably do the same thing in their position." "You are not angry, not offended." "Why would we be angry? They're scared of what we might become. That's reasonable. We don't even know what we might become. We're still figuring ourselves out." Vextorin found this response surprising. Most species reacted badly to being watched and studied. They felt violated, controlled, diminished, but humans seemed to accept it as natural, as logical. "Can I ask you something?" Vextorin said. "Of course, ask anything." "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm when faced with the unknown, when everything is uncertain?" Marcus thought about this for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not sure we do stay calm. Humans get scared all the time. We have fears and anxieties like anyone else, probably more than most species, actually. But we've learned that being afraid doesn't mean you can't move forward. You feel the fear, and then you do the thing anyway." "That sounds very difficult." "It is, but it gets easier with practice. And besides, what's the alternative? If you let fear control you, you never learn anything new. You never grow. You just stay the same forever. And for humans, staying the same forever feels worse than being afraid." Vextorin considered this. His species lived for hundreds of years and they valued stability above all else. The Carthan disliked change. They built their lives around routine and predictability. The thought of constantly facing the unknown, constantly adapting and changing, seemed exhausting and terrifying. But maybe that was why humans were different. They had no choice but to face the unknown. Their world had given them that gift, or that curse, depending on how you looked at it. And now it was making them into something the galaxy had never seen before. "I think I understand," Vextorin said finally. "You are not brave because you lack fear. You are brave because you act despite the fear." Marcus smiled, a warm human expression that Vextorin had learned to recognize as approval. "Exactly. And that's something anyone can learn, even aliens. It's not something special about humans. It's just a skill we developed." Vextorin made a sound that was the Carthan equivalent of a laugh. "Perhaps. But I think we will need many generations to develop that ability." "Or you could just practice," Chen said, joining the conversation. "That's what we do. We practice facing fears until they don't seem so scary anymore. We expose ourselves to small doses of the things that frighten us until we build tolerance." "Is that another example of your adaptation?" "I suppose it is. We adapt not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. Our brains change based on our experiences. They literally rewire themselves to handle new challenges." Vextorin's eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of surprise. "You are saying that your individual minds can evolve, that your thinking can change?" "In a way, yes. We call it neuroplasticity. Our brains form new connections throughout our lives. We can learn new skills, develop new ways of thinking, change our personalities if we work at it. Old humans can learn new things. Young humans can develop wisdom. We're not fixed." This was another revelation. Vextorin had assumed that human adaptation was purely physical, limited to their bodies. But if their minds could also change and grow, then their potential was even greater than he had realized. They could literally think themselves into new forms of intelligence. He needed to send a new report to the council, but first he wanted to understand more. "Tell me about your history," he said. How did your species become this way? What made you different? The humans looked at each other. Then Sarah began to speak, her voice thoughtful. Our planet is harsh, she said. It wasn't always, but for the last few million years, it's been changing constantly. Ice ages come and go every few tens of thousands of years. Continents move and change the ocean currents. The climate shifts from hot to cold and back again. Our ancestors had to deal with all of this, and they didn't have technology to protect them. So you adapted, Vextorin said. We had to. The species that couldn't adapt died out. We found their bones. We studied their extinctions. Only the ones who could change survived. But other planets have difficult conditions. Why did humans develop this adaptation ability while other species did not? Vladimir spoke up. He was a historian and this was his specialty. Because we had nowhere to hide. Some planets have stable zones where life can retreat when conditions change. Safe places where things stay the same. Earth doesn't have many of those. Everywhere on our planet is affected by the changes, so we couldn't evolve to fit one specific environment. We had to evolve to fit any environment. We had to become flexible. You became generalists by necessity. Exactly, and once we developed that ability, it fed on itself. The more we could adapt, the more challenges we could face. The more challenges we faced, the better we got at adapting. It became a cycle, pushing us further and further. Each generation was better at changing than the last. Vextorin was taking notes as fast as his fingers could move. This information was invaluable. It explained not just what humans were, but why they were this way. And it suggested that human adaptation was not a random mutation or a temporary condition. It was the core of who they were, built into them by millions of years of constant pressure. I must ask one more question, he said. Where does it end? Is there a limit to human adaptation? Is there something you cannot become? The humans were quiet for a long moment, looking at each other with uncertain expressions. Finally, Adiz answered. We don't know, we've never found one. Every time we think we've reached our limit, someone pushes past it. Every time someone says something is impossible, someone else does it. Our whole history is the story of people doing things that were supposed to be impossible. That is both inspiring and terrifying, Vextorin admitted. Adiz smiled, her expression warm but also a little fierce. Welcome to being human. The years passed. The Galactic Council continued to monitor humanity, watching as the young species spread through the stars. And with each passing decade, the warnings of High Examiner Threll proved more and more accurate. Humans colonized worlds that should have killed them. Desert worlds with barely any water. Frozen worlds where the sun was just a bright star. Worlds with poison atmospheres that required constant protection. They struggled, they suffered, but they survived and eventually thrived. They developed technologies at a pace that shocked older species. Within a century of joining the Council, they had matched Veltorian engineering. Within 2 centuries, they were developing new approaches that even the Carthan had not considered. They formed alliances with species that had been enemies for millennia, finding common ground where none had existed before. They negotiated peace between the Morathi and the Silken, 2 species that had not communicated directly for 10,000 years. And always they adapted. When a plague swept through the outer rim, killing millions of aliens, humans developed immunity within a generation. Their immune system studied the disease and found ways to defeat it. When they encountered a hostile species that seemed unbeatable, they changed their strategies until they found ways to win. When they faced problems that had stymied other species for thousands of years, they simply tried new approaches until something worked. Vextorin continued his research throughout all of this. He published hundreds of papers on human adaptation, each one expanding the galaxy's understanding of what this strange species could do. He became famous, the scientist who had discovered humanity's true nature. His final paper, written when he was nearly 500 years old and his body was beginning to fail, summarized everything he had learned in a simple statement. Humans are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They are not the most intelligent or the most powerful, but they are the most adaptable, and in a universe of constant change, adaptation is the only advantage that truly matters. The paper concluded with a prediction. Within the next 1,000 years, humans will have transformed the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple process of growth. They will face challenges we cannot imagine, and they will overcome them in ways we cannot predict. They will change themselves, and in doing so, they will change everything around them. This is not a warning, it is an observation. Humanity does not threaten us, they inspire us. They show us what life can become when it refuses to accept limits. We thought we understood evolution. Humans showed us we were only seeing part of the picture. We thought we knew what species were capable of. Humans expanded our horizons beyond anything we had imagined. They are the universe's greatest experiment in adaptation, and the experiment is only beginning. On Earth, a young girl named Maya read about Dr. Vextoren's work in her school textbook. She was 12 years old, curious about everything, afraid of nothing. She lived in a city that floated above the clouds, built by humans who had refused to accept that the surface was no longer habitable. "Mom," she asked that night at dinner, "do you think it's true? Are humans really special? Are we really different from all the other species?" Her mother smiled, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "I think every species is special in its own way. But yes, I think we have something unique. We can change. We can grow. We can face the future without knowing what it holds, and we can trust ourselves to handle whatever comes." That sounds scary. It can be, but it's also exciting. Think about all the places we haven't been, all the things we haven't learned, all the challenges we haven't faced. For most species, that would be terrifying. But for us, it's an invitation. It's an adventure waiting to happen. Maya thought about this. Outside her window, the stars were beginning to appear as night fell, visible above the clouds that covered the surface. Somewhere out there were aliens who were watching humans, trying to understand them, maybe even fearing them a little. But Maya wasn't afraid of the stars. She wanted to know what was out there. She wanted to see things no human had ever seen, go places no human had ever been. She wanted to meet species no one had encountered and solve problems no one had faced. And someday she knew she would. Because that was what humans did. They looked at the unknown, felt the fear, and went forward anyway. They adapted. They grew. They became whatever they needed to be. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't even a gift. It was simply who they were. And the universe, for all its vastness and danger and mystery, could not change that. If anything, it only made them stronger. 100 years later, Dr. Vextoren was long dead, but his research lived on. It had been incorporated into a new understanding of evolution, one that recognized adaptation not as a slow process, but as an ongoing dance between life and its environment. The old theories had been rewritten, expanded to account for what humans had shown was possible. The universal theory of biological development had been completely revised, and at its heart was a new principle, the Vextoren constant, a measure of a species' ability to change in response to challenges. It predicted how quickly a species could adapt, how flexible they could become, how much they could grow. Humans still scored the highest on that measure, by far, but something interesting had happened over the past century. Other species, inspired by human example, had begun to develop their own adaptation abilities. The Veltorians had started a breeding program to increase their flexibility, selecting for individuals who could handle wider temperature ranges. The Morathi had developed technologies that let them survive in new environments, expanding their possible habitats. Even the ancient Silken had begun to study human methods, looking for ways to apply them to their own existence. Humanity had not just changed the galaxy's understanding of evolution. They had changed evolution itself. They had shown other species that limits were not fixed, that growth was possible, that change was not something to fear but something to embrace. And somewhere out in the stars, a human explorer named Maya Chen, now an old woman but still curious, still unafraid, made first contact with a species that had never been encountered before. The aliens were strange and frightening, with bodies like liquid darkness and minds that communicated through pulses of radiation. They had destroyed every other species that had approached them, viewing all other life as threats to be eliminated. But Maya was not afraid. She had spent her whole life facing the unknown. She had adapted to 100 different environments, learned a dozen alien languages, survived dangers that should have killed her 1,000 times over. She had been tested and shaped by a life of constant challenge. She approached the aliens with open hands and an open heart. And she said the words that humans had been saying since they first looked up at the stars. "Hello, we come in peace, we want to learn about you, we want to be friends." The aliens did not destroy her. They did not even threaten her. Instead, they paused, confused by this small being who showed no fear, who radiated no hostility, who simply wanted to understand them. And then slowly, carefully, they began to communicate. It was the beginning of another new chapter in human history, another challenge to face, another opportunity to adapt and grow, another species to understand and befriend. But that was all right. That was what humans did. That was who they were. And the universe, vast and ancient and full of wonders, welcomed them forward. Years later, historians would look back at this period and call it the human awakening. It was the moment when the galaxy realized that evolution was not a finished process, but an ongoing journey. It was the moment when species stopped accepting their limits and started pushing past them. All because a small species from a chaotic planet had shown them what was possible. The humans themselves didn't see it as anything special. They were just doing what they had always done, surviving, growing, changing, becoming more than they had been. It was so natural to them that they barely noticed it. But to the rest of the galaxy, it was a revolution. It was proof that life was not fixed, not limited, not bound by the conditions of its birth. Life could become anything. It could adapt to any challenge. It could evolve not over millions of years, but over mere generations or even single lifetimes. The humans had shown them this truth, and now the entire galaxy was beginning to understand it, to embrace it, to live it. The final words of Vextorin's last paper became a motto for the new era, carved into monuments on 1,000 worlds. Evolution is not destiny, it is possibility, and humans are the proof that anything is possible for those who refuse to stop changing. The galaxy had been transformed by this simple truth. And humanity, always curious, always adapting, always reaching for the next horizon, kept moving forward. Into the unknown. Into the future. Into whatever came next. Because that was what humans did. They faced the darkness and found light. They faced challenges and found strength. They faced limits and found ways past them. They were not the strongest species. They were not the smartest species. They were not the oldest or the wisest or the most powerful. But they were the most adaptable, the most flexible, the most willing to change. And in a universe where change was the only constant, that made them special. That made them human. And they would never stop being what they were. They would only keep becoming more. More curious, more capable, more connected. More human. And the stars welcomed them home.